Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the shadowy waves of Viking legend, where thunder cracks across a black sea and the wind smells like salt blood and something suspiciously like fermented herring. You're standing at the edge of a longship's prow, gripping the slick wood rail as icy spray lashes your face. Ahead lies a village smoke curling from chimneys, unaware that Ragnar Lothbrok is coming. Or is he? See, this isn't just any raid. It's a half-remembered dream passed down in ale-fueled poems and whispering sagas. Your companions speak of a man with serpent-flecked armor, sons born of prophecy, and a death so dramatic it belongs in a Netflix finale. But step too close, and the tale squirms like an eel in your hands. Who was Ragnar? A flesh-and-blood warlord? A composite hero? A PR campaign in fur and fury? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky cracks again. You brace yourself. There's no going back now. You land on a dark shore in the 9th century, somewhere along the coast of Northumbria. Rain falls like tiny knives. You're soaked within minutes. The man beside you, taller than most, eyes like a hawk, grunts something in Old Norse and adjusts his axe. Is that him? Ragnar? Well, maybe. In the sagas, Ragnar storms England in the 840s, a lean predator from the sea. He's described as fearless, clever, charismatic, a warrior king who outfoxes emperors and marries shield maidens. But the earliest texts to mention him, like the Ragnar Saga Lothbrok, were written centuries later. You blink, centuries. Imagine trying to write your grandfather's biography in 2425, based on campfire tales and exaggerated tweets. Still, legends don't pop out of nowhere. You squelch through the muddy woods behind Ragnar's warband, wondering who this man really was. Maybe he was a historical Viking, just with a few fantasy upgrades. Historians still argue whether Ragnar was based on a real 9th century leader, possibly a Danish chieftain who raided Paris and England with flair, or whether he's more like King Arthur, a hero cobbled together from bits of older stories. The serpents are the first clue something's fishy. According to some accounts, Ragnar's nickname Lothbrok means hairy breeches, supposedly because he wore fur trousers to fend off a venomous snake attack. You imagine the medieval version of tactical cargo pants, equal parts ridiculous and intimidating. Fringe theory or fun detail? Hard to say. Your group slinks toward a monastery now, the iconic target of many Viking raids. The bell rings slow, mournful. The monks inside scatter like startled geese. Ragnar doesn't scream or charge. He watches, calculating. Then, with the calm of someone ordering lunch, he gives a quiet nod. Chaos erupts. You don't see Ragnar fight, exactly. He moves through it surgical, brutal, strangely silent. Later, by firelight, you sit across from him. He says little, just drinks. Then smirks. You realize he knows what people say about him, and maybe he's not correcting them for a reason. Here's the fun part. Scholars do agree that some Ragnar-like figure led raids in England around this time. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle even describes such a man, though never by name, who wreaked havoc up and down the English coast. Some point to a figure named Reginhurus who attacked Paris in 845. Sound familiar? Still, the evidence is murky, like looking at a face through rippling water. There are coins with no names, bones with no stories, and contradictory timelines stacked like drunken Jenga. And yet, something about Ragnar sticks. Maybe it's because he feels like every Viking ideal in one person: brave, ruthless, poetic. The kind of guy who could kill a bear barehanded, then write a poem about it while sipping mead. Or maybe it's because humans love the myth more than the man. We remember the snake pit, the fearless suns, the fur breeches. We want that to be real, even if our brains know it's mostly bedtime nonsense. As you drift toward sleep, the fire cracks. Ragnar's gaze meets yours across the flickering flame. He knows you're wondering if he's real. He just smiles and doesn't answer. You wake with damp boots and stiff knees. The campfire is a hushed memory, and your bones ache from sleeping on bundled cloaks. The morning fog rolls in thick and wet, muffling every sound except for the quiet squelch of mud underfoot. Somewhere nearby, Ragnar is already awake, his silhouette pacing slowly at the edge of the tree line. You trail after him, curious. The man from last night, the almost mythical figure with a smirk that said "I know something you don't," is now squinting at a wooden plow, a farmer's plow. Wait, what? Here's the thing about Ragnar. While he's most famous for raising cities and throwing snakes around like party tricks, some accounts insist he began as a humble farmer. Not exactly the image you expect of a future Viking celebrity, but it's not that far-fetched either. In the Norse sagas, even the fiercest warriors often come from pastoral roots, tilling the soil, raising livestock, occasionally fending off wolves with an axe. It's all part of the resume. So now you're walking beside him through a patch of farmland that smells of wet hay and pig dung, trying to reconcile two wildly different lives: the dirt-smudged farmer with calloused hands and the warlord who might have outwitted a French emperor. And historians? Oh, they still argue whether this duality was just poetic license or based in reality. Some scholars speculate that the real Ragnar, if such a man existed, could have started off as a regional leader or petty king in Denmark or southern Sweden. These weren't monarchies as we think of them. Viking society often revolved around jarls, warlords who ruled small pockets of territory. And like any ambitious local boss, Ragnar might have decided that farming just wasn't profitable enough. Enter raiding. You glance at the longship bobbing nearby, and you can't help but admire the sleek craftsmanship. These ships weren't just war machines, they were technological marvels. Shallow hulls, flexible frames, capable of sliding up rivers like whispers. If Ragnar transitioned from a man of the land to a man of the sea, the longship would have been his magic carpet. There's even a tail fringe. Admittedly, that he built his first raiding crew by offering neighboring farmers a share of the loot. You can almost hear him pitching it. Okay, listen. 1 week in England, and you'll never have to dig potatoes again. It's practically a startup, but back to that plow. You lean closer and see something scratched into the wood runes. Worn but still legible. They translate roughly to "From earth we rise, by sea we conquer." Chills creep up your spine. Is this legit? Did Ragnar really ETCH motivational slogans into his tools? Hard to say. But it fits the brand, doesn't it? Now, Let's talk about his rise, or should we say, the multiple rises of possibly multiple Ragnars, because here's the twist. Ragnar Lothbrok might not be a single historical person. Instead, he could be a patchwork amalgam of real warriors like Reginhurus, King Horik, and other Viking raiders whose lives were stitched together by storytellers hungry for epic heroes. You're essentially watching a historical remix, equal parts biography, fan fiction, and Viking highlight reel. Still, many believe the tale of Ragnar's evolution from plowboy to pirate king is anchored in truth. Even the Gesta Danorum, a 12th century Latin chronicle, describes Ragnar's early years as quiet, industrious, and unremarkable. Then bam, he marries a shield maiden, starts raiding, and suddenly everyone in Northern Europe knows his name. Glow up of the century. You're still thinking about this transformation as you follow Ragnar through a muddy village. He nods at locals. A blacksmith, a woman weaving fishing nets, children chasing chickens. This isn't a man above his people, it's a man among them. Whatever else he becomes, you sense he never truly leaves the soil behind, and it makes you wonder, what pushes a farmer to become a raider? Was it ambition, famine, wanderlust? Or maybe it was just the Viking version of a midlife crisis. Honey, I'm buying a boat and sacking Paris. There's a fringe theory, half whispered among Nordic scholars, that Ragnar's shift came after a harsh winter destroy his crops. With mouths to feed and no grain to trade, raiding became a survival tactic, not a choice. It's not heroic, but it is deeply human. The rain returns as you both reach the edge of a cliff overlooking the fjord. The sea waits below, dark and endless. Ragnar doesn't speak. He simply watches the waves, lost in thought. You realize this isn't just a man who commands warships. This is a man at war with stillness. He thrives on motion, change, risk. Farming might have taught him patience, but raiding? Raiding gave him power, and maybe that's the real clue. His legend wasn't forged in fields, but it was rooted there. That paradox, humble beginnings, thunderous destiny, is what makes Ragnar compelling even now. You watch him walk away, cloak fluttering like a raven's wing, and you can't help but feel it. The soil still clings to his boots, but the sea has already claimed his soul. The day breaks with the sound of clanging metal shields being tested, swords being weighed, and someone arguing about who gets to bring the mead. You shuffle toward the noise and find Ragnar standing at the center of a growing crowd. But this time, he isn't leading a raid or plotting a siege. He's negotiating domestic matters. Love. Even Vikings weren't immune to its chaos. Today's topic: wives, specifically Ragnar's wives. And if you thought keeping track of his battles was hard, wait until you untangle his love life. Because according to the sagas, Ragnar had not one, not two, but 3 wives, each more epic, dramatic, and questionably real than the last. The first and fan favorite is Lagertha. Yes, that Lagertha, shield maiden, warrior, queen of memes. Their meet-cute is peak Viking romance. Ragnar arrives to avenge a murdered relative, fights off a bear and a hound guarding her home, and wins her hand in marriage. You can practically hear the heavy metal ballad playing. Lagertha isn't just a fierce fighter. She's a standout in the saga universe. She rides into battle with her hair loose, swinging a sword like a valkyrie. But historians? Well, they raise eyebrows. Some argue she may be a poetic echo of Norse deities like Thorgerd, or an invention of 13th century chroniclers looking to spice things up. You watch her sparring with men twice her size, and you wonder, was she real? Or did someone invent her as the Viking answer to Wonder Woman? Still, whether she lived or not, her impact is undeniable. Her marriage to Ragnar is stormy, short-lived, and ends when he divorces her to marry someone he saw in a dream. Enter wife number 2, Aslaug, a seer, a beauty, the daughter of legendary dragon slayers Sigurd and Shield Maiden Brynhildr, unless she was actually just a peasant girl raised in a harp case. You heard that right. One version of the story claims Aslaug was smuggled out of danger as a baby, hidden in a harp like some kind of mythic guitar case baby Moses. You find her sitting quietly outside a tent, grinding herbs into a paste. Her eyes meet yours, and theirs. Something unsettling about how calm she is. In the sagas, Aslaug predicts events before they happen. She warns Ragnar not to consummate their relationship too early. He ignores her, and their first son is born with malformed bones. Awkward. Still, Aslaug bears Ragnar multiple sons, most of whom go on to become important figures in Viking lore like Ivar the Boneless and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. We'll get to those guys soon. Her mystique, her intellect, her almost divine heritage make her a central part of the legend. But again, was she ever real? Historians still argue whether Aslaug was an actual historical figure, a stand-in for Norse myth, or a symbolic placeholder for powerful Viking woman. And then there's wife number 3, Thora, less famous, but important in the saga cycle. Ragnar reportedly kills a serpent guarding her home to win her hand, earning him the nickname Lothbrok, thanks to those iconic hairy trousers he wore for protection. Yes, again with the snake motif. At this point, you're half convinced. Ragnar was a part-time snake charmer. Thora's story feels more like a fairy tale than a historical account. But it serves a symbolic purpose. Each wife represents a different phase of Ragnar's identity. Lagertha is the wild youth, Aslaug the mystic queen, Thora the dragon prize. Together, they form a sort of mythological resume. And as for Ragnar himself, you sit beside the fire, eavesdropping on warriors retelling his love life like a Viking soap opera. Some say Lagertha was his truest equal. Others defend Aslaug as the brains of the operation. A few swear by Thora because, well, killing a snake for your girlfriend still earns points in any century. You realize something odd. Each of these women adds weight to his legend. They aren't footnotes, they build Ragnar's myth. And the fact that their stories are so contradictory, layered, and fantastical makes the question of his reality even murkier. The more wives he has, the less historically grounded he becomes. It's like watching a figure slip from history into myth, one romance at a time. And here's the quirky detail you didn't see coming. In some obscure 14th century texts, there's a rumor that Lagertha killed her second husband just because he annoyed her. No trial, no feud, just you breathe too loud and bam. Honestly, you can kind of relate. You lie back on the grass, watching smoke trail from campfires into a starless sky. You think about how much of history gets written through the lens of relationships. Kings and queens, heroes and lovers, ambition and betrayal. Ragnar's story is no different. It's stitched together by love, loss, and the people around him. Whether they were flesh and blood or figments of saga poetry, You drift off with a final thought. Maybe it doesn't matter if they were real. Maybe what matters is why they were remembered. The next morning, your pillow is a rock and your blanket is, well, also a rock. You sit up, joints protesting, and realize the camp has moved. Ragnar is already gone, taking most of his men with him inland toward a fortress he claims smells like easy silver. You're left with a smaller group, mostly older warriors and skalds, the storytellers, and that's where the real magic begins. One of the skalds missing several teeth, but not an ounce of drama, leans toward you and whispers, "You want to know the truth about Ragnar? Then forget what you've seen. Listen to the sagas." You follow him to a flat rock near the stream, where he begins to chant. The words rise and fall in musical cadence, conjuring not just stories, but worlds. And boy, do the sagas deliver. There are dragons. There are shapeshifters. There's a ship made entirely of dead men's fingernails, gross but innovative. Ragnar doesn't just raid kingdoms, he wrestles monsters, visits the underworld, and drops poetry like a Norse slam poet. You quickly learn that most of what survives about Ragnar Lothbrok comes from the Ragnar saga Lothbrokar and the tale of Ragnar's sons, both written centuries after he allegedly lived. And these aren't historical records in the modern sense. They're a swirling mix of oral tradition, mythology, and medieval imagination running on full volume. Still, every tall tale hides a kernel of truth, right? Take the bit about Ragnar slaying a giant serpent with a spear and his famously hairy breeches. Most historians chalk that up to symbolic storytelling. Snakes often represent death, danger, or primal fears. Others argue it's a distorted memory of some real, venomous confrontation, or maybe just medieval people being very bad at describing crocodiles. Seriously, one fringe theory says the serpent was a Nile crocodile brought back by traders, which raises more questions than it answers. Then there's the saga's claim that Ragnar traveled to the land of the Rus and the Islamic Caliphate. That would make him one of the most well-traveled men in early medieval Europe if he actually existed. But remember, this is also the man whose sons allegedly took down kingdoms in a single afternoon. So, scale your expectations accordingly. You start to notice the pattern. Ragnar is less a man than a literary tool. He becomes whatever the skalds need him to be. A cautionary tale, a romantic hero, a terrifying raider, a grieving father. One poem has him weeping over Aslauг's prophetic dreams. Another has him laughing in the face of death. It's like each storyteller added their own seasoning to the stew, until the original flavor was long gone. Historians still argue whether these sagas were rooted in real events or were simply attempts to construct a national identity for the Norse world. After all, it's easier to unite a people when they share a common hero, especially one who's too dead or too fictional to disappoint them. You lean in closer as the skald retells Ragnar's epic journey to rescue his kidnapped son. There's a magical bird, a trial by fire, and an underwater sword fight. You blink. Even Marvel wouldn't greenlight this script. But in a way, that's the point. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're cultural memory. The Norse didn't build statues or write down strict histories. They sang their past. They performed it. And in doing so, they created larger-than-life figures like Ragnar to carry their hopes, fears, and worldviews. One particular tale grabs your attention. Ragnar disguises himself as a poor farmer to infiltrate a rival's camp. He sits by the fire, listens to their plans, then casually slaughters everyone in their sleep. You stare at the skald. He shrugs. Classic Ragnar. Could that have happened? Maybe. Guerrilla tactics weren't unheard of, and the Vikings were masters of subterfuge. But again, the details are murky. Was this Ragnar, or someone else whose legend got folded into his? Still, you're enchanted. The skald's voice is soft now, almost hypnotic. He speaks of Ragnar's final battle one, where he faces overwhelming odds, knowing it will end in his death. But he fights anyway, and when he falls, he laughs. How the little piggies will grunt when they hear how the old boar died. That line sends chills down your spine. Real or not, it feels true. And maybe that's what matters. You look around the camp. The old warriors nod along with the tale, their eyes shining not with belief, but with belonging. Ragnar is their Odysseus, their King Arthur, their myth made flesh, even if the flesh is a bit imaginary. You lie back on the grass as the skald finishes the saga with a flourish. The fire crackles. The stars shimmer. And for a brief moment, you wonder if truth was ever the point, because some stories don't need to be real to be true. You don't even hear them coming. One moment, you're helping the camp's cook try to fish a burnt hunk of elk from a pot. The next, war horns shatter the quiet. Ragnar's returned with fire in his eyes and silver on his mind. But this time, it's not a quiet raid on a monastery or a skirmish over livestock. No, this is something bigger. Paris. You're going to Paris now. Before you start picturing baguettes and barrettes, take a breath. This is 845 AD. Paris isn't a romantic city of lights. It's a fortified island on the Seine, surrounded by palisades and ruled by the Carolingians. Still, it's one of the richest targets in Europe, and Ragnar has set his sights on it. You board the longship with a nervous knot in your stomach. Around you, warriors ready their weapons. Some smear war paint on their faces. One guy just starts screaming. Every crew has that one guy. Ragnar stands calmly at the helm, eyes fixed on the horizon like he's already counting the gold. According to historical records, including the annals of St. Bertna, Viking warlord named Reginhurus led an attack on Paris in 845 with around 120 ships. Most scholars believe this was the real Ragnar, or at least a major inspiration for the character. Whether that's true or not, the siege was terrifyingly effective. You arrive on the Seine under a sky the color of cold steel. Paris looms ahead, its walls studded with archers, its gates tightly shut. Most defenders think they're safe behind their walls. Ragnar, naturally, has other plans. The Viking fleet splits, some heading upstream, others downstream. It's a classic pincer maneuver. The defenders barely have time to react before screaming villagers flee into the city, bringing tales of pale-eyed demons and fire from the water. You hate to admit it, but it's kind of impressive. And then Ragnar unleashes his secret weapon, psychological warfare. Here's the legendary part. The Frankish defenders capture a few Viking raiders, standard stuff. But when they hang the prisoners, in full view of Ragnar's camp, he doesn't respond with fury. Instead, he sends back his own prisoners, branded, mutilated, and with a chilling message. I'll see you soon. You shiver. Because you know he means it, but the strangest part of this whole siege is what happens next. Instead of a direct assault, Ragnar feigns sickness. Word spreads through both camps. The Viking leader is dying. Some say it's divine punishment. Others say he's cursed. And then days later, he rises from his deathbed, demanding to be baptized a Christian. The priests agree, possibly hoping his soul will be saved. Or maybe just wanting to end this nightmare. That's when Ragnar asks for a Christian burial. In Paris. Inside the city walls, you blink, they let him in, and the moment the gates open to bring in his body, likely laid out dramatically on a wagon, Ragnar's men surge through behind it. Surprise, he wasn't dead after all. Classic Ragnar. Historians still argue whether this coffin trick actually happened. Some think it's a total fabrication, a flourish added by later chroniclers to explain how a fortified city fell so easily. Others believe it's a distorted memory of a Trojan horse-style ruse. Either way, it's pure saga gold. What is certain is that the Franks paid Ragnar a massive ransom to go away. Historical documents confirm that King Charles the Bald handed over 7,000 livres of silver, equivalent to literally tons of wealth today. You can almost hear Ragnar laughing as the treasure is hauled aboard. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some sources claim he distributed the loot evenly among his men, which, if true, would have made him a surprisingly fair employer, though modern economists might question his long-term fiscal planning. You lean on the railing of the ship, watching Paris shrink into the distance. Around you, men cheer, sing. Pass around 2 strong mead. One plays the lyre, plucking a tune that sounds suspiciously like "We Will Rock You." 9th century edition. Ragnar stands apart, arms folded. You can't tell if he's satisfied or already planning the next conquest. There's a weight to him now. Something darker behind the smile. Because here's the thing. After Paris, Ragnar's legend explodes. Whether this was a real historical moment or just a well-scripted myth, it becomes the beating heart of his story. The point where a regional raider becomes a continental icon. But in sagas, nothing good lasts forever. You see it in the way Ragnar watches the horizon, not with pride, but with weariness. Maybe he knows what's coming. Maybe he senses that with every victory, his legend swells until it threatens to consume the man beneath. You wonder what it's like to live as a myth. To be real, but also more than real. And, slowly, to be replaced by the stories others tell in your name. The mood in the camp has shifted. You feel it in the quieter nights. The way the warriors stop laughing quite so loud. The way Ragnar stares at the fire a little too long. Something's changed. Not in the weather or the food, still the usual mix of fish, smoke, and regrettable bread, but in him. Because now, the stories aren't about Ragnar anymore. They're about his sons. You're sitting near the fire when one of the younger warriors throws a bone into the flames and says, when Ivar hears this, he'll be furious. Another chimes in. Born wouldn't wait. He'd have sailed yesterday. You lean forward, curious. Ivar? Born? The names are familiar, like echoes from some other saga. And slowly, the pieces click. Ragnar Lothbrok's legend doesn't end with him. It branches out, widens, multiplies into the stories of his sons, each as colorful and confusing as their father. And that's where things get murky again. Because historians still argue whether these sons were real people, legendary avatars, or just characters duct-taped to Ragnar's name to lend them credibility. Let's meet the suspects. First up, Ivar the Boneless. Easily the most infamous. Some claim he was born without bones, hence the nickname, though others believe it referred to incredible flexibility, or even impotence. Yes, the possibilities range from acrobatic warrior to tragic footnote in medieval bedroom gossip. Your pick, but here's the catch. Ivar is one of the few of Ragnar's so-called sons who's actually attested in historical sources. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle names him as a leader of the great heathen army that invades England in 865. So yes, there was an Ivar. Whether he was boneless, bone-weary, or just bone-chilling is up for debate. Then there's Bjorn Ironside. Legend says he was so tough, blades couldn't pierce his skin. Like a medieval Marvel hero, minus the spandex. According to some tales, he sailed into the Mediterranean and raided the coasts of France, Spain, and even Italy. One particularly spicy account claims he tricked a walled city by faking his own death. Sound familiar? And leapt from his coffin to open the gates from inside. The apple didn't fall far from the trickster tree. Historians generally agree that Bjorn may have existed, likely as a powerful Swedish chieftain. But was he really Ragnar's son? That's where the scholarly shrugging begins. He could just as easily have been a rival warlord later written into the Lothbrok family tree to make him seem cooler. Next on the list, Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Yes, his name refers to an actual snake-shaped birthmark in his eye. Imagine trying to make eye contact in a negotiation with that guy. He appears in a few sagas and Danish king lists and may have ruled in Zealand or Denmark. Again, the records blur fact and fiction like a fogged-up mirror. And finally, Hvitserk. Poor Hvitserk is often the least defined of the group. His name might not even be a name. It could mean white shirt, a nickname for someone else entirely. Some versions of the sagas merge him with other sons or make him a tragic figure who dies in a fire surrounded by his enemies. Arguably, the most Viking death ever. You sit by the fire, listening to the tales ripple through the camp. Every warrior seems to have a different version of the brothers, how many there were, where they ruled, who they loved, who they killed. It's like trying to build a family tree out of smoke, but one thing is clear, these sons are central to Ragnar's myth. They are the legacy he leaves behind, whether by blood, name, or sheer narrative necessity. In a world driven by lineage and legend, having famous sons wasn't just useful. It was essential. The quirky tidbit? In one saga, Ragnar is so obsessed with his sons being warriors that he refuses to feed them unless they show signs of bravery before age 10. One reportedly bit a snake. Another challenged a bear. You wince imagining this as a reality show. Viking toddlers, who will bleed first? And here's the truth few acknowledge out loud. These sons may have eclipsed Ragnar entirely. You sense it in the way the younger warriors tell the tales. Ragnar is the origin, but they are the action, the revenge, the glory. His story sets the stage, but his sons steal the show. And Ragnar? He seems to know it. You catch him one evening, sitting alone, carving something into a block of wood. It's a figure thin, tall, arms crossed. One by one, he adds smaller figures beside it. 4 in total. He doesn't smile. He just nods to himself. like a man who's already becoming a memory in someone else's story. There's a pit in the earth, and there's Ragnar, standing at its edge. You followed him through farms and fjords, over rivers and burning cities, but nothing prepares you for this place. The air here is different, heavier. There are no birds, no breeze, just silence, broken by the occasional hiss from somewhere deep below. The pit isn't just a hole. It's the pit, the one whispered in every version of his legend, the one filled with venomous snakes, writhing in the dark, their scales glinting like cursed coins. This, they say, is where Ragnar met his end. Maybe. You step closer, squinting into the gloom. You can't see the bottom, but you can hear something moving. The ground around the rim is scorched black, as if even the earth didn't want to remember what happened here. Let's back up. According to the most famous version of the tale, mainly found in the tale of Ragnar's sons, Ragnar is captured by King Gley of Northumbria during a raid gone sideways. The king, less than thrilled to find a Viking celebrity poking around his kingdom, allegedly tosses Ragnar into a pit of snakes as execution. It's traumatic, it's poetic, and it's suspicious, because here's where the scholars start to frown. For one, there's no contemporary English record confirming Ragnar's death this way. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, normally eager to document Viking activity, doesn't name him at all. And King Gley himself is a murky figure. Some sources claim he was a usurper, others insist he was a legitimate king, still others barely mention him. But the saga insists it happened like this. Ragnar, bound and dropped into the pit, laughs as the snakes strike. He sings a death song, recounting his glorious past, unbothered by the pain. His final words? How the little piggies will grunt when they hear how the old boar died. Chilling and weirdly specific. You glance at Ragnar now, sitting at the edge of the pit. His face is unreadable. Is he remembering the past, imagining the future, or just contemplating the poetic absurdity of it all? Historians still argue whether the snake pit was symbolic. Some think it represents the Christian fear of paganism serpents being classic villain material. Others think it's a literary device, a way to give Ragnar a martyr-like exit. After all, what's more myth-worthy than dying surrounded by symbols of sin, laughing defiantly? And then there's the fringe theory that Ragnar didn't die here, that he escaped, or was ransomed, or simply vanished into the mist like a Norse Obi-Wan. Some versions say he died at sea. Others claim he was executed by different means. And at least one ballad from the Faroe Islands insists he faked his death entirely. You take another step toward the edge, and suddenly you do hear something like a dry, low rattle. You freeze, probably just a lizard or a ghost. Or both. The skald from earlier appears beside you. He's chewing something bitter-smelling and says, "A good death is hard to write." You glance at him. "You mean have?" "No," he replies, "right." Because really, Ragnar's death, if it happened this way, isn't just an ending. It's a setup. A narrative slingshot to launch the next saga, the revenge of his sons, the rise of the great heathen army, the Viking conquest of half of England. And it works. Whether real or invented, this moment becomes the hinge of the legend. Ragnar's fall triggers a chain reaction that shakes the medieval world. You try to picture it. The snakes, the singing, the silence at the end. Would he have laughed? Probably. You've seen that look in his eye, the defiance, the awareness that his story is more than his body, that even in death he's winning. You sit beside him now, both of you staring into the abyss. He turns slightly, not enough to look at you, but enough for you to feel his attention. Do you think it's deep enough? He murmurs. You don't know how to answer. Maybe it doesn't matter, because whether Ragnar died in a snake pit, on a battlefield, or in bed with a flagon of mead in one hand and a cryptic riddle in the other, what matters is this: the story, the image, the echo, a man staring down death and making it part of the legend. You're not even dry yet from the last raid when the ground starts rumbling. No thunder this time. No storm. Just the steady, growing rhythm of footsteps, thousands of them. You crest a hill, heart pounding, and then you see it. The great heathen army, and it is massive. Stretching across the horizon, the army moves like a tide of steel and leather. Longships lie beached on the shore behind them, stripped for parts or waiting to be dragged inland. Tents rise in messy clusters. Horses snort and stamp. Smoke curls from cook fires where meat spits and sizzles. You feel like you've wandered onto the set of the most intense Renaissance fair ever assembled. You catch a glimpse of the Liederstall, grim-faced men with hair braided tight and armor blackened by years of war. And at the front, 4 names echoed like thunder: Ivar the Tie, Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Vitsirk. The sons of Ragnar, and they are not in a forgiving mood. Their father is dead, allegedly tossed into a pit of serpents by King Law of Northumbria, and now they've come to make the earth itself remember his name. That's the tale anyway. But historians? They're still squabbling. Because while the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle does confirm the arrival of a colossal Viking force in 865 AD, it never names them the Great Heathen Army. That catchy label came later. What it does say is that these Norse invaders were unlike anything the English had seen before: organized, ruthless, strategic. Less pillaging pirates and more mobile war machine. And while the chronicles do mention Ivar and his crew by name, the connection to Ragnar is conveniently vague. There's no contemporary English source that links them directly to him. So either everyone just forgot to mention that their dad was the most famous Viking in lore, or the genealogical link was later added to give the invasion an extra cinematic flair. But standing here now, watching warriors march in perfect sync, you don't care. The grief is real. The rage is palpable. The banners flapping in the wind show a coiled serpent, jaws open, Ragnar's sigil, or at least what the sagas claim it was. Even if they're not all his sons by blood, they are his legacy in spirit. And their campaign? It's brutal. The army smashes through East Anglia, Northumbria, and Mercia with terrifying efficiency. Monasteries are looted. Fortresses fall. Entire kingdoms bend the knee or vanish altogether. You ride with the vanguard into the ruins of towns that once stood for centuries. The smell of fire and whetstone clings to your clothes for days. And yet, it's not all blood and chaos. These aren't just raiders anymore. They're settlers. Some build camps, repair roads, even negotiate treaties. Coins from the time show Norse names side by side with Anglo-Saxon rulers. They weren't trying to burn England to the ground. They wanted to own it. That's the historical twist no one expects. The great heathen army wasn't just driven by revenge. It was also about power, land, and permanence. And Ivar? He becomes the most feared of them all. Despite the boneless nickname, he moves with lethal precision, sharp in mind if not in stride. The annals of Ulster even mention a figure thought to be him, calling him a king of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain. Which is just medieval speak for, don't mess with this guy. But here's the fringe detail that makes you squint. Some fringe scholars argue that Ivar the Boneless may have actually been the same person as Amr, a Norse Gaelic warlord who ruled Dublin. The timelines overlap suspiciously. The names are eerily similar. Could Ragnar's myth have swallowed another historical figure whole? Back at camp, you sit near a group of younger warriors polishing axes and swapping tailies. One of them says, Ivar's planning something bigger next. Another mutters, Bon wants to go south. He dreams of Rome. They all talk about Ragnar like he's a North Star, distant, untouchable, but always there. You find yourself staring into the fire, remembering his laugh, that smirk, that gaze that could slice through fog. He's gone, but somehow more present than ever, because this army, this conquest, it's not just a campaign, it's a funeral march with swords. And as you drift off to sleep among the tents and embers, you realize something. History may debate whether Ragnar lived, but the world felt his death, and it responded with fire. You're ankle deep in mud, and someone just stepped on your cloak. Again, the battlefield is chaos, horse hooves tearing through puddles, arrows whispering overhead, and the kind of thunder you can feel in your ribs. You're marching with the army now, not just observing, and the war drums never stop. Ever. Ahead lies York. You glance up at the gray skies as the sons of Ragnar close in on the city that took their father's life. Northumbria's jewel, now a trembling kingdom clinging to its defenses. King Leia is here, or so the rumors say, and everyone knows what that means. Revenge is about to become very, very personal. The siege isn't subtle. The Vikings surround York, cut off supply lines, and block every escape route. It's not just about conquest anymore. This is theater. This is justice, Viking style. And the story that comes next? Oh, it's not for the squeamish. When the gates finally fall, Gla is captured. Hauled before Ragnar's sons, he looks every bit the condemned man. No saga can resist what happens next. They sentence him to the Blood Eagle. You flinch just thinking about it. According to the sagas, the Blood Eagle was a gruesome execution method, slicing open the victim's back, severing the ribs from the spine, and pulling the lungs out to form wings. It's horrifying. It's symbolic. It's also very likely fictional. Historians still argue whether the Blood Eagle ever actually happened. Some claim it's a poetic metaphor for death in battle, or a misinterpretation of Old Norse kennings, those metaphor-packed turns of phrase Viking poets loved. Others say it might have happened once or twice as extreme punishment, but never as ritualized myth. Still, in the tale of Ragnar's revenge, it's essential. Whether Gla's ribs were turned into angel wings or not, what matters? Is this Ragnar's sons win? York falls. Northumbria is crushed. The king who allegedly tossed their father into a snake pit ends his days staring up at gray skies and the stone-hard faces of men who will not forget. And just like that, the arc completes, from the farmer's plow to the serpent's pit, from Sagas whispered by firelight to the muddy killing fields of England, the story circles back to its origin. Ragnar is avenged, but here's where the story gets even more interesting because you'd think the brothers would be satisfied now. Spoiler, they're not. The army doesn't disband. It doesn't sail home. Instead, it spreads. Like a vine, like smoke. Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, every kingdom becomes a target. Some make deals, others fight and fall. Viking settlements spring up like mushrooms after rain. You see it firsthand in the aftermath of York. New homes, new fences, Norse and Anglo-Saxon farmers bartering at the edge of markets. War transforms into something else. Occupation, culture, intermarriage, governance. And here's your quirky historical tidbit. Evidence from burial sites in York, or Jorvik, as the Norse called it, shows that within a generation Scandinavian and English customs blended. People were buried with swords and crosses. Some houses used Norse-style fire pits next to Roman-style bath systems. Call it multicultural. 9th century edition. You're resting in one of these new settlements when you hear a bard reciting the tale of Ragnar and his sons. You listen, fascinated, but something's different. This version? Ragnar fights a dragon. His sons have magical boats. Gla explodes into snakes. It's less history, more fever dream. You smile. You get it now. Each retelling adds another layer, another twist. Ragnar isn't just a man anymore, he's a medium. A canvas for hope, revenge, and legacy. You look around. Boys play with wooden swords. Their mothers call them in with names like Bjorn and Ivar. Ragnar is gone, but his name is on every tongue. Carved into shields, sewn into banners, whistled into the wind. That's the kind of immortality kings would trade crowns for. So did Ragnar. Really die in a snake pit? Did his sons really carve wings from a king? Historians still argue. But as you lean against a warm stone wall, fire crackling at your side, it doesn't matter, because what Ragnar started didn't end with his death. It began with it. It's strange how quiet things have gotten. No drums, no howling warriors, just the soft rustle of trees in a breeze that smells like damp wood and old soil. You're far from the front now, away from York and the clash of vengeance. Ragnar's sons have scattered, some to rule, some to raid, some to vanish into the folds of history. And you've wandered into the heart of legend country, Denmark. You didn't expect to find Ragnar here. Not really, but locals point you toward an old hill. A burial mound, they say. Big, lopsided, grass-grown. That's where they say he lies. One old woman mutters, tightening her shawl. But then again, they say that about 5 other hills too. And she's not wrong. You climb the mound slowly, boots sinking into soft moss. The view from the top is worth the climb. Rolling forests, a thin silver river winding through the land. And in the center of the hill, someone's left a small wooden carving. A man in a horned helmet, anachronistic, sure, but heartfelt. You sit down beside it, because it's time to ask the question you've been dodging since this story began. Was Ragnar Lothbrok real? The truth? No one knows. Some historians think Ragnar wasn't a person at all, but a fusion of several legendary Viking leaders, like Ragnar, the guy who attacked Paris, or King Horik I, who ruled Denmark around the same time. or even a dozen nameless raiders whose deeds echoed loud enough to be stitched together into a single super warrior. In short, Ragnar might be the Norse version of King Arthur, part history, part national bedtime story, all myth. But then again, isn't that exactly what makes him so powerful? Because here's the scholarly debate. Some argue that mythological figures like Ragnar were created deliberately, as propaganda, a symbolic figure to rally identity, pride, and fear. Others say these characters emerged naturally from oral tradition, born from campfires and long winters and the human need to make meaning out of chaos. Whichever side you fall on, one thing is certain. The idea of Ragnar mattered more than the fakerv, than the ting is certain. The idea of Ragnar mattered more than the don, the agnain kor, man, and that idea left fingerprints everywhere. Take Ragnar's Drapa, an ancient Norse poem attributed to Bragi Boddason, one of the earliest skalds. It's said to praise Ragnar and his feats, describing images on his shield mythology wrapped in poetry, wrapped in battle metaphors. While the surviving fragments are dense and cryptic, they offer something invaluable, the sense that Ragnar was already a legend while the ink was still drying on early Norse verse. Or consider how Ragnar's sons continued to be named in later king lists. Even long after the Viking Age faded, Danish and Norwegian royals tried to trace their lineage back to him. Why? Because even in medieval politics, brand recognition matters. Your quirky fact of the day: there's a 13th century Icelandic manuscript that describes Ragnar's trousers, yes, those famous hairy breeches, as being made from wolfskin soaked in tar, allegedly to protect him from a serpent's venom. So basically, the Norse invented hazmat gear and fashion-forward combatwear in one go. Respect. You rest your hand on the little wooden carving beside you. It's crude, charming, probably whittled by someone who half believed the stories. You wonder if they left it as a joke or a prayer, and you realize something. Belief doesn't need proof. It just needs repetition, memory, reverence. Even now, centuries later, Ragnar walks through TV shows, video games, novels, and meme pages. He's everywhere and nowhere. Real and unreal, and perhaps the greatest trick Ragnar ever pulled wasn't the fake funeral in Paris or escaping from foreign kings. Maybe it was this: convincing the world that he ever lived. You lie back on the grass, hands behind your head, watching the clouds drift over Denmark. Somewhere in the distance, someone is singing a saga. You can't hear the words, but you feel the rhythm. And just for a moment, it doesn't matter what's true, because the story still lives. You wake to the sound of gulls screaming overhead and the crash of distant waves. You've made your way to Katdgat. At least that's what the locals call it, though scholars still debate whether this legendary Viking town ever truly existed in the form we imagine. In the sagas, Kattegat is Ragnar's home, a hub of trade, power, and family drama. But modern historians point out that the real Kattegat is actually a body of water, not a town, a narrow strait between Denmark and Sweden. Still, standing here on this rugged Scandinavian coastline, wind ripping through your cloak, it's not hard to picture it. The wooden docks creaking underfoot, longships swaying in the harbor, the clang of smiths and the smell of salt and smoke. It's myth-made manifest. You wander through the market stalls. A woman sells iron brooch shaped like wolves. A child with tangled hair tries to trade you a fish for your belt. There's a carving of a man with one eye hanging behind the blacksmith's. Stall Odin, no doubt, watching. Always watching. And everyone knows Ragnar's name. You ask about him casually, trying not to sound too much like a tourist, and the stories come tumbling out. Some say he ruled here for decades. Others insist he left to chase glory and never came back. A few whisper that he never existed at all, and you're just chasing ghosts. But no matter the opinion, his shadow is everywhere. Even now, people name their children after him. Ragnar's in school. Ragnar's on football jerseys. Ragnar on mugs and T-shirts. He's gone full Norse Elvis. One elderly fisherman leans in close and tells you, Ragnar once swam across the fjord in full armor just to impress a woman. She married him, of course, he adds with a wink. You try not to laugh, because honestly, it sounds like something Ragnar would do. Historians still argue whether places like this were political capitals or just narrative backdrops. The sagas love to place drama in conveniently symbolic locations. Was there ever a real seat of power for Ragnar? Probably not in the centralized way we think of kingdoms. Viking leadership was often fluid, more like powerful clans than crowned monarchs. But the idea of Kattegat endures because humans need homes. Even mythical ones. You walk down to the shore and watch the longships bob. One is being repaired, its hull patched with fresh tar and goat hair. Nearby, someone has carved runes into a driftwood log. You can't read them, but a younger warrior translates, all men die, but not all men are forgotten. It's a fitting motto for this place. And for Ragnar. The quirky tidbit today. Some Icelandic sources claim that Ragnar's sons divided the world into thirds, literally splitting up Europe, Asia, and Africa between themselves like it was a board game. No one seems to agree how they did this, or if they even knew what Africa was. But it's the kind of over-the-top storytelling that defines their legend. Modesty was never in the family toolkit, and yet, for all this grandeur, there's something peaceful here. You spot a woman telling her children bedtime tales under a pine tree. Her voice is soft, her hands animated. She's retelling the saga of Ragnar and Aslaug, the shield-maiden wife who foresaw the fate of their sons. The kids are wide-eyed. Not scared, just spellbound. You lie back on a rock near the harbor and let the salty wind carry their voices to you. The words float and bend and ripple like waves. You think about everything Ragnar was: farmer, warrior, father, myth. Sometimes cruel, sometimes noble, always larger than life. And yet, in this moment, as the sun sinks low over the sea, he feels human, not a king, not a monster, not a god, just a man with hairy breeches and a complicated family. And somehow, that's enough. You're sitting by a smoky hearth in a longhouse, the kind where stories seem to cling to the rafters like soot. The walls are lined with shields, and hanging above you is a woven tapestry, faded but still vivid with reds and blues depicting Ragnar on a longship, axe raised high, wolves at his feet. A bit theatrical, maybe, but you've learned not to question Viking interior design. An elder settles in beside you. He's weathered, like driftwood with eyebrows, and he doesn't waste time with pleasantries. You've heard the stories, he mutters, but have you heard what came after? You nod and lean in, because what happens after Ragnar's death is almost as strange and tangled as his life, if not more so. The great heathen army did its work, carving up England like a roast. His sons, real, legendary, or somewhere in between, became rulers, warlords, founders of dynasties. But then, things get complicated. Take Bjorn Ironside, for instance. The sagas say he sailed to the Mediterranean, raided the coasts of Italy, and even tried to sack Rome. That's bold. Modern historians think he might have attacked Luna, a city in northern Italy that he thought was Rome. When he died or disappeared, he supposedly founded the House of Muncha, a Swedish royal line that reigned for generations. Historians still argue whether the Muncha dynasty truly descended from Ragnar or if that lineage was invented later to legitimize their rule. It wouldn't be the first time a king padded his resume with borrowed glory. Still, coins from the period have turned up bearing Norse names and symbols, suggesting that someone up there was definitely cosplaying as Ragnar's grandkid. Then, there's Ivar the Boneless, whose legacy is even murkier. Some say he ruled from Dublin. Others claim he vanished after the conquest of York, leaving only whispers and smoke. One theory suggests he died of a sudden illness. Another, that he retired, yes, retired to the Irish countryside, possibly to open a very intense yoga studio. And Sigurd Snake in the Eye? Supposedly, he inherited lands in Zealand and ruled with cunning and cruelty. He appears in several Norse king lists, though again blurry at best. Some sources say he was killed in battle. Others say he lived a long life and died peacefully in his sleep, which, frankly, feels like cheating. The quirky detail? There's a claim that one of Ragnar's descendants eventually married into the English royal line, meaning, if you squint hard enough, there's a sliver of Ragnar in Queen Elizabeth II's family tree. Whether that's true or just historical, fan fiction is up for debate, but it's a fun image. Ragnar's ghost politely nodding during a Buckingham Palace garden party. And as for Hvitserk, well, his fate is the most tragic. Some versions say he lost his mind after endless war. Captured by enemies, he was given a choice: be burned alive or convert. He chose the fire. No songs celebrate his name. No kings trace lineage to him. Just a footnote in a very long scroll. You glance back up at the tapestry. Ragnar's woolen eyes stare down at you, and you start to see the truth behind the stories. They weren't designed to last in stone. Not like Roman statues or Greek inscriptions. Viking memory was oral fluid, adaptive, alive. The people who remembered Ragnar didn't care about academic rigor. They cared about meaning, about telling their children and their children's children what courage looked like, what cunning sounded like, what legend felt like, and maybe that's why Ragnar endures, because the minute his supposed son stepped onto a battlefield and shouted his name, the man transformed into myth. He became a symbol, a shorthand for the Viking Age itself. Every conqueror needed a forefather, every warlord needed a ghost, and every firelit night needed a story to hush the wind and stir the soul. The elder beside you clears his throat. You know what the real question is? He asks. You shake your head. It's not whether Ragnar lived, he says. It's whether we'd even know how to see him if he did. You sit with that, because maybe, just maybe, the moment Ragnar became real, the stories would have had to end. But legends? Legends never need to die. You're walking through fog. Thick, soupy, clinging to your skin, fog that makes the world feel like it's been erased and reskinned with silence. The kind of silence that crackles with old stories. The kind Ragnar would have walked through with a grin and an axe. You're not in a battlefield now, nor a market or a royal hall. You're in the in-between, the realm where history fades and only whispers remain. This is where the sagas live, not in books, not really, but in memory, in fragments. In you, the Icelandic sagas, where so many of Ragnar's stories are preserved, weren't written until centuries after the events they describe. The most famous, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok and the tale of Ragnar's sons, were composed in the 13th century, long after the Viking Age had cooled into legend. And yet, these sagas became gospel for generations of Norse descendants. They weren't just entertainment, they were moral codes, identity-building blueprints, sleep stories and survival manuals rolled into one. You pass a storyteller in the mist, seated on a stump, speaking to an invisible crowd. His voice is soft, but confident. Ragnar Lothbrok, he says, was born of no one and fathered everyone. Bit dramatic? Sure, but try to find a Viking Age hero whose DNA doesn't somehow trace back to him. As you wander deeper into this ethereal saga space, scenes flicker past like torchlight in a cave. There's Ragnar in his hairy breeches, climbing a cliff to slay a serpent with nothing but cleverness and raw ambition. There's Aslaug, his brilliant wife, giving riddles and prophecies that always turn out to be true. There's Lagertha, shield maiden, lover, fighter, whose tale was so compelling even Saxo Grammaticus, a stern 12th century historian priest, couldn't leave her out, though he did try to tone her down. You smile, remembering one of the best lines from the sagas. She fought in the front line with her hair loose over her shoulders, and all who saw her were amazed. Same Saxo, same. Historians still argue about whether these characters, especially the women, were based on real individuals or were retroactive additions to spice up the tale. But the presence of powerful, complicated women in the Viking world isn't fiction. Archaeological finds like the now famous warrior grave in Birka have proven that at least some women fought, ruled, and were buried like kings. And then there's the curious fact: the oldest known mention of Ragnar doesn't come from Scandinavia at all. It comes from Frankish and Anglo-Saxon sources, where he's seen less as a heroic father figure and more as a terrifying force of chaos, a boogeyman in longships, a nightmare in fur and steel. Perspective is everything. And so is intention. You sit now in the fog as the storyteller finishes his tale. The fire before him glows low, and thus, he says, the old boar died, but not before he taught the piglets how to grunt. The audience, imagined or not, is silent. So are you, because suddenly you realize what the sagas were really for, not to preserve history, not to replace it. They didn't just fill in the gaps. They rewrote the past with flair, fantasy, and fire. They gave shape to fears. They transformed real trauma, death, invasion, exile into stories of honor and divine vengeance. They made life meaningful, and that's what Ragnar became, the literary solution to a cultural identity crisis, a symbol of resistance, of cleverness, of wrath when necessary. Even now in modern pop culture, Vikings, Assassin's Creed, museum exhibits, podcasts, Ragnar appears, again and again, wearing a dozen faces, sometimes brooding, sometimes bloody, sometimes oddly tender. He's a mirror, and we still hold him up to our world, asking, what does it mean to be strong? You rise from the stump beside the fire, the fog's lifting dot just a little, and through the thinning veil, you swear you see him, Ragnar, walking ahead of you. Not turning back, not waiting. Just walking, because stories, after all, are meant to move. You follow Ragnar through the mist. He doesn't look back, he never does, but his shape is clear now. No longer just a voice in the sagas or a name carved into runestones, but a silhouette that somehow feels real, weighted, worn, unfinished. You're not in a story anymore. You're in its echo, and as the fog clears completely, you find yourself standing before something you didn't expect, a museum. Yep, a literal museum. Clean walls, glass cases, a climate-controlled hush that replaces the chaos of Viking drums. Inside are relics, helmets, axes, jewelry, fragments of ships, each one labeled in tidy black font, 9th century, possibly Danish, attributed to Norse warriors of uncertain origin. And over there, in the center, a statue of Ragnar Lothbrok. It's bronze. Handsome, heroic, maybe a little too perfect. There's no hairy breeches, no snake bites, no haunted eyes. Just a chiseled jaw and the quiet dignity of a man who definitely flosses. This is Ragnar polished up for modern tastes. You walk past tourists snapping photos. Some are reading the plaques. Some are just here for the gift shop. One child points to the statue and says, "That's the Viking king who fought dragons, right?" You don't correct him, because sure, why not? The line between education and entertainment is always blurrier than we like to admit, especially with someone like Ragnar who was born in that blur. His legacy exists because people needed a story. That felt true, even if it wasn't. That's how he survives. You pause at a case containing an ancient sword, rusted and cracked. The tag beneath it reads, believed to be from the Viking age. No confirmed owner. You imagine Ragnar holding it anyway, because part of you wants it to be his. Even though you know better. That's the tension, isn't it? The historian in you wants evidence, DNA, dated texts, proof. The storyteller in you wants dragons, snake pits, death songs sung through bloodied teeth. Historians still argue where the truth lies. Some think Ragnar was a conglomeration of raiders and warlords remembered collectively under one name. Others suggest he was a completely fabricated figure created to explain the great heathen army's terrifying rise. A few even believe the name Ragnar was a title like Caesar or Pharaoh, passed down or adopted as needed. That would explain why so many stories about him contradict each other wildly, like someone edited multiple movies into one chaotic director's cut. And here's today's quirky twist. In 2016, a study of DNA from Viking gravesites revealed how widely the Norse people traveled and intermingled with locals, suggesting the Viking identity was far more fluid than we thought. Which means Ragnar, if he did exist, might not have even called himself Viking. He might have just been a man with a boat, a sword, and some very loud sons. You leave the museum. The sun is low now. The street lights flicker on. The modern World has returned in full. Cars, coffee shops, couples bickering over GPS directions. And yet, Ragnar lingers, not in a mystical way, not in a ghostly shimmer, just there in your mind, your steps, your breath, because he's not just in the past, he's in the spaces between. Every time someone says Ragnar with awe, every time a kid swings a stick and yells for Valhalla in a playground, every time a teacher opens a lesson on Viking age raids and sees eyes light up, he's the bridge. From fact to fiction, from history to story, from who we were to who we want to believe we could be. You stop at a bench and sit. The night is cool, the city quiet, and in your pocket is a small token from the gift shop, a pewter coin with Ragnar's face on one side and a serpent on the other. Tacky, a little, but also perfect, because legends aren't meant to sit behind glass forever. They're meant to be carried. You're at sea again. The longship glides over still waters, its sail catching just enough breeze to keep the motion smooth, like the world itself has decided to take a breath with you. No oars splash, no gulls cry. Just that hypnotic creak of wood and the whisper of wind through rigging. And Ragnar is here too. He stands at the prow, looking out over the endless gray-blue horizon. Not young, not old, not scarred or perfect, just him. As if you've been following not a man but an idea now. At the edge of the world, that idea has paused to look back, not at you, at itself. You sit beside the mast, watching the wake curl behind the ship in soft ribbons. Somewhere below, maybe, serpents still slither in the depths. Or maybe not. Maybe they're just shadows, just stories, just leftover fears from a darker age. But the sea remembers everything. And so do you. You think of Ragnar the farmer, struggling to coax food from frozen soil. Of Ragnar the dragon slayer, cleverly outwitting death for love. Of Ragnar the husband twice, 3 times, maybe more each relationship, shaped as much by myth as by mortal messines. You remember the serpent pit, the death song, the great army that thundered across kingdoms in his name. Remember the debates, the contradictions, the endless arguments between scholars, skeptics, and saga believers about whether he ever truly was. But above all, you remember how he made you feel, because it turns out that's the truest legacy of any myth, the emotional fingerprint it leaves behind. Ragnar wasn't about accuracy. He was about impact, about the weight of the axe, the lift of the sail, the way a name can echo louder than any sword strike. And now the ship slows. The sky has softened from blue to lavender to velvet. Stars blink awake, and the moon rises pale and shy. Ragnar turns not with a grin or a speech or a final wink, but with a nod. A simple human gesture. And then he steps back, dissolving not into mist or fire, but into memory. You lie down on the deck, and the story ends. The waves continue long after. The ship has stopped. They lap against the hull like a soft lullaby, steady and old. You breathe in the salty air. Let it settle in your lungs like a slow exhale from centuries past. The sky overhead is wide and still, stars scattered like grains across a velvet cloth. No more battles, now. No riddles, no snake pits, no debates over what was real and what was just sagas, whispering their way through time. Only the quiet and the knowing, because whether Ragnar Lothbrok lived or was stitched together from scraps of story and the needs of a restless people. His journey mattered. It carried something across oceans and through generations. A lesson, a feeling, a question. Who do we become when the world forgets us? Maybe we become stories. Maybe that's the best thing to become. So let the wind carry the last of the firelight. From his tale, let the longship fade into the dark. Let your breath slow to the rhythm of waves and old songs you half remember. You've followed a legend. You've walked in the footprints of a ghost. And now, finally, you get to rest. Let the past keep watch for a while. Sweet dreams.